Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Limitless Show. Today, my guest and I will be talking about grieving at a young age. So if you know someone who's lost a parent at a young age, or if you have lost a parent at a young age, then this video is definitely for you. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest, Camille Ravine. I'm so excited because we are so similar, I feel. We've only just met, but there's so much that I feel we can give you on this topic. So thank you so much for being here, Camille.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily. I'm really glad to be here and talk about what we're going to talk about.
No worries. For anyone who is new to the show, The Limitless Show is where I bring a new guest to my YouTube channel every single week, and we talk about a limitation that they've had in their life and how they've overcome it, or how they are overcoming it, in the hopes of, if you have the same limitation, that this advice may help you better your life. So Camille and I were talking, and he said that he would like to talk about losing a parent at a young age. And this really interested me because I myself also have lost a parent at a young age. So first of all, Camille, if you wouldn't mind saying how you lost your parent, what parent it was, and what happened, if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, of course. So when I was 13 years old, I went to school, was walking back home, came into the house, and then I walked into the living room, and then there I saw my dad, who was essentially just like on the floor. And at that point, I had no idea what was going on, very kind of shocked, confused, just can't really explain what goes on in your head at that point. So then I rang my mom, rang the ambulance, and did everything they told me to do. But at that point, it was like too late anyway. It was already gone. I just didn't realize that at the time. So then when the ambulance came over, they did all they could as well. And as I said, he was already gone. So there was nothing that could be done. And then at that point, just had to deal with the kind of aftermath of that, with mum coming home, sister coming home, all of us having to go through that process of shock, and just that whole night of everything that happened there. But yeah, so I essentially lost him. It was like instant. We later found out it was an aneurysm. So it was just also instant, couldn't be predicted. And that's essentially how the whole thing happened. No one saw it coming, and that's kind of how it all just went from there.
I had no idea it was you that found him. And I think that puts for me, that an extra, like, my heart hurts. And with things like this, I always say that no matter how you lose a parent, it's always awful. So for example, if a parent had cancer and you're losing them for a long time compared to a parent dying straight away, they're both losing a parent, both is awful. But for you to actually find him in that position, I'm very sorry for your loss. But I'm sure, as we'll find out in this interview, that you have also gained so much strength from this, and it's shaped you into the person you are today. And I have a feeling that you are a great person. So once again, thank you for sharing that. I also lost my dad when I was going to turn 13. So I was 12, and he passed away of a heart attack playing football. So like you, it was very sudden, but no way losing a parent in any way is awful. So I think that's the first thing I want to point out in this video. If you have lost a parent, where you've lost them, no one is worse than you, no one is better off than you. It's an awful thing to deal with. But what I want to ask you is, how did this limit you when you were growing up as a 13-year-old boy to the age you are now?
I'd say it was quite, there are a lot of layers to the limitations, and it's probably quite complex, really trying to analyze how it may have limited me. But what comes to mind is the fact that, especially at the start, when people talk about their parents, people talk about their dads, whatever, that kind of brought up feelings for me at that point when it was still fresh, because it's just very raw when people talk about their parents, or they assume you have a parent as well.
Yeah.
Because when they ask you about your parent, then you're like, oh, like, I think there were even points when it first kind of happened that I just didn't actually mention it. When people asked me, I'll just like not actually bring it up, because I just
Because it makes you feel awkward as well, because you feel like they're going to have to go through that feeling of, oh, I'm sorry for your loss, and it's like, oh, I won't put you through that kind of thing. That's how I found it.
And I mean, now I just say it like it's just a normal thing for me.
Mm.
But at that point, it was, yeah, just happy to bring that up to people who didn't know about it. Actually, I'd say when that happened, I didn't really process the grief in the healthiest way,
Mm.
because when it happened, I used to just bottle it up or pretend, or just like ignore it, just pretend it wasn't like there. And by doing that, in hindsight, that essentially just bottled up a lot of anger too. And I kind of learned that anger is essentially a mask for pain or fear, right? So that kind of manifested itself in that way in terms of the energy I was carrying around. So because I wasn't really allowing myself to feel it, allowing myself to just let it all out, I kind of had that bottled up inside. And then there were kind of little triggers now and then, every once in a while, where that anger would come out. And it was like this steaming, just really intense, like rage, right? It's not
Mm.
there anymore. But at that point, I think that was just like one of the manifestations of not letting myself grieve, because the energy kind of got stored into like anger, you know? So
Yeah.
that was another thing I had to face. And apart from that, I'd say certain like life events, certain experiences, you'd be thinking, oh, they're not here for this, or they aren't seeing this happen. And yeah, that was always kind of like sometimes a hard point, you know, birthdays or special
Mm.
occasions and stuff like that. You could start to think about it. But yeah, those are some of the limitations that I was facing as I was going through that process of grief.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things, I don't think you ever deal with this kind of thing, but you do deal with it, but it's never like going to go away. It's never something that's going to like miraculously feel wonderful about. But one of the things I do struggle with is thinking about the future. Say if I get married or have children, thinking that he's not going to be there. That's one of the hard points for me. I just want to talk about through some of the points that you've just said and how you now cope with that, how you have overcome that, or what mindset have you changed, or how have you helped yourself to feel better in these sorts of situations. So obviously with the first example, you said that you just come out right with it now, like you don't have a dad, he's not alive, and you're okay to say that. How
Mm.
did you, what mindset change did you have to be able to do that?
So the thing is, I feel like sometimes, especially with grief, people aren't always ready to hear something they're not ready to hear, or they're not always ready to make a shift they're not ready to make. I've gone through different phases of overcoming this, of accepting it, or whatever, right? So it happened like 10 years ago now. And people always say time heals like everything, but that's not true. So time can make things easier, but it doesn't necessarily fully heal or fully like allow you to come to terms with something.
Yeah.
So I'd say time was one factor, but it wasn't actually something that really allowed me to recover from it. It just made things easier to live with. But that's not what I want to do. I don't want to just live with something. I don't want to just accept the fact that there's always going to be pain, because that I don't believe that to be true. At one stage, I did think to myself, some wounds never heal. For the last couple of years, I've had some realizations about how that isn't true. Some of the things that did help was, I say a couple of years ago now, I went through this kind of, as I started to get into personal development, and go on this journey of mine, I also started to have a kind of spiritual path too, like a spiritual awakening and all of these things, and start to get a greater understanding of kind of myself, like this life we're in, this world, all of this. I was able to reach a point of taking ownership of this experience, as opposed to seeing myself as a victim, as something that this happened to me, and something that was like affected my life in this way. I started to see it as something that happened for me, because life happens for us, not to us. That's a very powerful shift to make. So I was able to get a greater understanding of why it happened, because sometimes when these things happen to us, we are like, why? We
Yeah.
just don't, we can't comprehend why this has happened to us. Like, there's no point in this happening at all. Now I essentially have understanding of its purpose, as role that it played in my life, and how it's shaped who I am now. And I'm actually grateful for that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't take that experience back. And I'm actually happy that it happened, because that's the point I'm in. I wasn't always ready to say something like that, but I'm at that point now where I can.
Yeah.
So
No.
that was another thing, essentially taking ownership as opposed to being a victim. One of the biggest shifts I had was actually quite recent. recently, because I think as a result of this thing happening to me on some level, like subconsciously, whatever, it started to affect the relationships I had. Because in terms of like love, commitment, these kinds of things, I think there was a link there in terms of the people I would attract, how I would behave in certain relationships and stuff like that. And it kind of came down to the fact that when we perceive someone to love us, when we perceive to receive love from someone, we think that love is coming from them, whether that's a parent, a sibling, a partner, a friend, or whatever. We perceive the love to come from them, but that's not actually true, because anytime we are feeling love, it's coming from our thinking, and we are creating that feeling of love already. And that was powerful because when I lost my father, I thought I essentially lost that love. And that was something that was kind of missing, or something that was lost, and something that was kind of not with me. Like I didn't have a part of love with me, right? But then I realized if love is created from our thinking and we create it ourselves, even if we perceive it to come from someone else, that means that love I thought was lost can actually be accessed at any point. I never lost that love in the first place, and it's always with me anyway, because it never came from him. It came from me. I just perceived it to come from him. So when I realized there was nothing actually lost, and that love can be accessed at any point, that was quite a big shift for me.
That's so powerful. I love that. I've never thought that way. So thank you for enlightening me with that. That's definitely something I'll start to think about. I just want to take you back through the points of what resonated with me. I 100% agree that time does not heal. It may give you time to think about things and think about things differently. Like with time and losing my dad, when I used to see parents or a father particularly with their children, it would make me really upset, and I'd think, all of that, I'm missing out on that, I don't have that. But now as I'm older and by having time, I look at that and I think, I used to have that. How amazing were the memories I have, and I'm so grateful that this family has that. I'm so grateful for them. So time does help, but it will never heal. There will always be some sort of wound, but it doesn't have to be a deep, horrible wound. Like, people can love their scars. And I love how you say that you would never change that experience. I wouldn't change my experience too. Like, I would 100% love my dad to be back here, but I know that's not possible in the slightest. But what I do know is the things that I've learned and the person I've become because he isn't here, them things are amazing. And I would not be the person I am today. And I like me. I would not be the person I am today if he was still here. I would not have met the same people. I would not have done the same things. I would be on a different path. I definitely wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be doing my platform, Live Without Limits. There's so many things that I am grateful for because it did happen. But that doesn't mean that I love him any less or wish that he wasn't here, if that makes sense. Yeah, you've said so many amazing things there. I'm entirely grateful for this conversation. You've already touched on my next question, but we've talked about the limiting things that we feel that we've limited us. Another thing that I felt that was limiting me when I was younger, not everyone loses their parents when they're younger. A lot of the problems that my friends were having were boyfriend problems or makeup troubles or bitchiness or something that seemed small to me. And I was dealing with this massive thing, losing my dad, like him dying. And I was like, how is everyone complaining about such small things? But what I've come to realize as I've grown up, everyone deals with what they have on their plate differently. So you losing your dad may be the biggest thing in the world that has ever happened to you. It probably is. But someone like breaking a nail or breaking up with a boyfriend, that's the biggest thing that they've ever had to deal with. And that's just as hard as you losing your dad, because that's all they've ever experienced. So what I've come to also realize on this journey is to never downplay anyone else's troubles, never downplay anyone else's experiences, because what they're struggling with right now is the hardest thing that they've ever had to deal with. Although what seems like losing a parent does seem like the hardest thing ever, everyone's dealing with different things in their own way. So I think that's another thing that I took away from this experience. Like, everyone's having troubles, and just because you've lost your dad, you think that's the biggest thing in the world, but to someone else, their problems are also just as big as yours.
Especially when it just happened, seeing other people complaining about certain things and not kind of, obviously at that point it was kind of frustrating, but yeah, in hindsight you just see that it's relative and everyone goes through their own things, and we're not here to kind of judge that, because everyone has their own lens everyone has their own perspectives and how they see things, and that's just what they're going through on their journey. So yeah.
What I really want to talk about, and I think we've touched on a little bit, is what you've gained from this. What have you gained from this experience? Because maybe someone's watching this video who's just lost their parent at a young age or at any age, and they can think, well, nothing good is ever going to come out of this. But I want to know, what have you gained from this experience? How has it shaped you as a person?
Yeah, it's definitely given me a tremendous amount of strength, because I knew as I was growing up, like if I can make it through that, like I can pretty much make it through anything. So I just have that inner kind of resilience, strength, courage to basically do whatever I want to do. I didn't necessarily come into that straight away. It took time to kind of for me to hone into that. But I'm in a place now where I have that courage, that strength, that determination, that resilience. It's also given me, I'd say, a lot of a sense of love as well, in terms of how you treat others and how your perspectives are when you take things for granted too. Because I think it's very easy to do that, because we always tend to only appreciate something once it's not even there anymore. In terms of how I say would treat my mum now or my sister and things like that, and the relationship I would foster with them, it's probably definitely actually improved that relationship because of what happened.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, definitely the same. Even though I still have arguments with my mum, they do not last long at all. It's soon it's like, I'm so sorry, I love you, like I do love you, because the truth is, when you have this sort of perspective, you do realize that life is short. You realize that life is amazing, but you do realize at any moment you yourself couldn't be here or someone else can't be here. That did scare me at the start, because I used to have a fear that I could lose anyone. But as I said, time has gone on, it's given me more of a gratitude towards the people in my life, more love in my life. There's been times when I've gone through hard things in my life recently, and I've literally had a little pep talk with myself and been like, hey, Emily, like, you've dealt with the death of a parent. You can do this. Like, in comparison to that, you can do anything.
I like how you talked about that we're essentially not going to be here forever. And this doesn't necessarily mean in terms of the people we could lose, but essentially what you're doing now with this the Limitless show and everything, and empowering people to basically live their best life and do what they want to do. We do have a tendency to think, which we've just got all the time in the world, and not actually do the things we want to do. But like when you really see the fact that we're not here forever, it can kind of give you a kick up the arse to think, why am I just letting limiting beliefs get in the way? Let's just fucking do this.
Yeah, it's the longest thing you'll ever do, but it's also so short. And I do love that we have that perspective now. I also often ask myself, and it's kind of a morbid question, but I kind of ask myself, if I was to die in 6 months' time, what would I regret not doing? And that gives me another kick up my bum to go and do the things that I'm afraid to do, or the things that I don't think I have enough time to do. And I think, well, actually, if I wasn't here in 6 months' time, what would I want to have done? Another question is, grieving is really difficult. And I saw like a quote, it's like waves, and sometimes the waves are really harsh, and sometimes the waves are spread out, and sometimes they hit you and sometimes they don't. It's really an awkward thing, grieving, because you never know when it's going to hit. Sometimes you could be like the happiest person in the world, and then something reminds you of something you're missing out on, or something that is a memory, and it just hits you for a little while, or it hits you for a day, or when it's first happened, sometimes it hits you for months. But obviously, as human beings, we're still grieving now. It's 10 years on for you, it's 11 years on for me, but there's still days when there is sadness. What do you do now to cope with that? What would you say to someone who is still grieving or finding it difficult grieving?
Allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to feel it. Don't like neglect it. Don't think, oh, I'm fine, like I'm at peace with it, without actually being at peace with it. So just always let yourself feel it, let yourself grieve, let it out, because it's essentially that energy needs to be released. And the more we kind of push it down or push it away or ignore it, then it's gonna have an effect. So whenever those times happen, just purely feel it.
Yeah, I definitely did what you did at the start. I didn't allow myself to feel. I just kind of pushed it away. And it's really bad as well, because I recently lost someone very close to me recently, and I know I'm doing exactly the same thing as what I did with my dad, but at least I know that I'm doing it, and I need to sort out my grieving, because grieving is a really important process. And if you don't do it, it's going to affect you for a long time. Or if you like bottle it up, there's going to be just this mass explosion of your grief. So yeah, feeling it and allowing yourself to feel. You can't be happy all the time. It's not possible. Like, you've got to have loads of different emotions. That's life. Emotions are called emotions because they're in motion. Like, you have to feel them. What would you say to your past self? What would you say to 13-year-old you?
Well, I'd say that person was a lost soul, someone who was kind of in turmoil, just really lost with things and not sure what was going on. So I'd say to that person, basically, yeah, it's going to be okay. Things are going to work out for you. Yeah, like your path is on the right place right now. So that's essentially that. At a basic level, that's what I'd say to that person.
I would definitely say that whatever happens, just hang on in there. I think I dealt with depression and anxiety a lot 3 or 4 years ago. It took me to a really dark, horrible place, not a pretty place. And I think it was partly to do with losing my dad. But if I went back to my past self, I would tell myself, just hang on in there. Even when it's hard, just hang on in there as much as you can. If all you can do that day is just stay in bed, or just have a shower, or make your bed, that's enough. There will be days when you can do so much more, and there'll be days when you can do so much less, and that's okay, just as long as you're trying your hardest. Because actually, I'd love to know this from you. My biggest lesson I learned from my dad, of something that he told me, was always try your hardest. I was walking home from a New Year's Eve party, and I was really worried about some form of exams, or I don't know, it was SATs when we were back in the old days. And I was really worried, and it was just me and him, and he said, whatever you do, make sure you try your hardest. And that's always stuck with me. I would love to know what stuck with you. Was there something that he ever told you, or you did together? What's really a good memory of you and your dad?
I mean, I have a lot of memories of us spending time together, doing like DIY work around the house and the garden, like going on bike rides and traveling the world and stuff like that. So I have a lot of fond memories, and we had a great relationship. But I think one thing that really does stand out to me is what I picked up through him unconsciously. When my family see me, or yeah, basically like my family see me, they always tend to say like I look just like him, or things like this, or they see a lot of him in me. And it's not just in terms of appearances, it's also in how I carry myself, in terms of like certain facial expressions, or the way I might move, and things I'm not actually conscious of, I just do. But that essentially did come from him, I guess, mirroring him as I was growing up and stuff like that. So it's as if like part of him is essentially living through me too, and that's quite like a nice thing. When
It,
you spoke about the human side, the emotions, and honoring those, I just wanted to say that we tend to see negative emotions as a bad thing. We tend to see sadness and grief, anxiety, whatever, as bad. But if we learn to actually love those things about us, and choose to actually love the fact we grieve, love the fact we are feeling this right now, and actually honoring our human and just loving it anyway, that also makes things a lot easier, because we don't have this perception of it being a really bad thing.
and also, when you're grieving, it's because you loved so much, you loved so hard, you had an amazing relationship. Also thinking of that way, you did have something amazing, and that's why it's so hard. But as a kind of a last thing, is there any last thing you would add to this conversation? Any last thing you would say to someone who's grieving at a young age or any age? What would you say to them?
I'd say that it's going to seem really hard and confusing and tough right now, but it does get better, and there is a way for it to get better. And just allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. Don't hide it, don't bottle it up. Just allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to grieve, and it will get better, because we are proof of that. And it's not just time, but you're going to learn more about your grief, learn more about yourself as on this journey, and in time things will change.
Yeah, no, thank you. What I would say is, it tends to be that your biggest weakness is your biggest strength. The biggest strength in my life is that I lost my dad. My biggest strengths is that I dealt with depression and anxiety. The hardest things in your life are going to be the things that make you the best person. You just have to tap into it and tap into that way of thinking and switch your weaknesses to your strengths. Because the reason I'm doing this is, or any of my Limitless shows, is there's always going to be someone in a path behind you, 2 steps behind you, 5 steps behind you, 5 years behind you, that you can help. What has honestly helped me through this journey is learning how to help other people. And I wouldn't have learnt that if I didn't have to deal with my dad's death, if I didn't have to deal with that horrible, crappy thing. I wouldn't be who I am today. So just know that whatever you're going through, it's going to get better. You're going to get better. You're still going to hurt sometimes, but it's going to be okay. And your biggest weakness, this is going to be what makes you into the person you are.
I love that. There was one thing that came to mind as well, in terms of people who still have parents or both their parents now.
Oh yeah.
Because I think every teenager goes through it as you're growing up. But as I've kind of matured and kind of come into my own, that's changed. But as I was growing up, I used to kind of behave differently with friends, differently with family, and like maybe hide parts of myself or like not tell them about certain things. And over the years, I started to see quite a contrast in terms of how I'd behave and how much I'd reveal about myself, because there were kind of like 2 different people that started to happen. Like I'd have the person I would be and like act around like all of my friends, and then I wouldn't tell some of that part with like my mum, for example.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want it to be like that. As I started to get older, I just shared more and allowed my mum to actually know more of that part of me, because I still see it now in terms of like some people who don't tell stuff to their parents, don't allow them to know all of them. And I thought to myself, if I have a kid, I wouldn't want to not know my kid. I'd want to really know who they are, even if it's not going to be something I'd be happy with or whatever. I'd still want to like know them and know like who they really are. Being more open with our parents. And I know this isn't going to like, I'm making a generalization with parents and all of this, but if you are in that place where you feel like you're not sharing a lot, maybe just consider if you could start sharing more and could start being more open and have that communication and have foster that greater relationship.
Yeah, because one of my questions that I did forget to ask, but thank you for answering it anyway, was what would you say to people who had parents? But I also want to say that to people who have lost a parent as well, think about you still have that parent and what amazing relationship. And I love that you share more. I definitely share more with my mum. I don't think I'd be as sharing if it didn't happen. And that bond that grows when you share more. And also that you do then realize, and once again, I'm generalizing with parents as well, you do realize that your parents do love you no matter what silly things you've done. And when you start sharing as well, and it becomes more of this friendship. That's what I've loved about growing up. And that's another thing that I'll miss with my dad. I miss that I didn't know him as a friend. I knew him as a father, and I knew him as this persona that I made him to be. Because when you're younger, your parents are just your parents. They're not humans. They're just your parents, aren't they? And what I love from growing up is this relationship that I have with my mum. She's my best friend. I know things about her that I didn't before, and she knows things about me. And it's this friendship, it's not a parent-daughter. It's also like a best friend relationship. So I'll definitely miss that with my dad, but make sure whoever you have in your life, not just parents, your friends, make sure they know that you love them, and just, try to keep them relationships, because it's going to be hard to lose someone, but it's better to love and lost than never love at all. Oh, that quote came to mind. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, Camille. Literally, I've loved this conversation, and I would love you to come back on the Limitless show to talk about something else. If he has inspired you, to whoever's watching this, I will put all of his details in the description below. go and say hello to him. He has some amazing content on Instagram. But yeah, I'll put everything in the description below. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and hit the bell button so you never ever miss an episode of The Limitless Show. I will definitely see you next week, but thank you to everyone involved with this video.
Thank you so much, Emily. It was great to be here today.